Hey, a microphone helps. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. And today, going to do a little mock draft battle. I know it's not mock draft Monday, but we're going to do a battle today because I've been playing around. It's a little unorthodox, a little unconventional. I've been playing around with AI lately. And just for fun, I decided to present a challenge to the two biggest programs out there, ChatGPT, GPT, and Grok, and gave them a challenge based on available prospects, roster needs, everything you can find out, all the information you can find out about where guys are ranked and what the Seahawks need. Give me a Seahawks 7-round mock draft. I've got the results. I'm going to leave it up to you to judge which one is best. That's coming up next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Head on over to BetUS and they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit when you open a new account today. 125% on your second and third deposits using the promo code YouTube150. This episode also brought to you from the folks at Doer, built for doing. That's D-U-E-R. Best apparel I have ever worn, and especially these right here. These stretch performance jeans are my daily go-to. I've tried their moleskin shirts and their joggers and their hoodies. Those are great too, but these things are outstanding. 20% stretch, so they move with you. They're incredibly light and comfortable, but there's more to them than that. They are strong and tough. They are built for doing. Antibacterial, sustainable materials, breathable materials. And right now, if you head over to shopdoer.com, that again, spelled DUER/forever, they'll give you 20% off your first order. That's shopdoer.com/forever for 20% off your first order. All right, you guys, welcome into the show and get ready for more of this. Live shows daily at minimum Monday through Friday. I mentioned this yesterday. If you didn't catch that, not going to always be at the same time every day, but I will do my best to let you know in advance what's coming up. And now that I'm all settled in the new spot, I'll be mapping out the next couple of weeks and lining up a bunch of guests that have kind of been sitting on deck and have agreed to come on. I can't wait to get into some combine stuff. That begins next week. And then, of course, free agency starting after that, and then rolling into the draft as I do this full time, at least for the next few months. Be sure to like this video, hit subscribe and that bell button so you always are notified of new episodes and live streams. All the other ways you can support the show are detailed down below in the description with links when appropriate. A couple of things before we get into these two drafts. Spent some time today. Still haven't gotten all the way through it. It's really long, but Robert Mays and Dane Brugler on the Athletic Football Podcast came out with their pre-combine episode yesterday, and it is unbelievable. In fact, Dane Brugler is so good at this, and he's been doing this for so long, and he works so hard at it. And they talk a little bit about that, his process and what this combine situation is like for him. He's literally spending 20 days in Indianapolis. That's how into this, the combine he gets and how important it is, not just for what he sees on the field at Ford Field with the athletic testing and the measurements and weights and lengths and specs and all of that, but also talking to scouts and coaches about players and getting a better feel for how teams view these prospects and where they might go and where they might fit in the draft. And he actually apologized to Robert for bringing up so many names. There were 65 guys he wanted to specifically talk about in terms of who he thought was going to show out at the combine, who most of the eyeballs will be on, and what some of the big storylines will be after that. And I'll get into some of that myself Monday and Tuesday leading up to the combine. But I just wanted to touch on it a little bit, and I'll have some more thoughts later as I finish it up and kind of go through it. Probably going to listen to it a second time because I'm sure there's some things little nuggets in there I missed. But just a couple of things to touch on. He was asked who he expects to be involved in the headlines after the combine. Like, think Xavier Worthy last year, right? With the sub 4.340, he went back out, Didn't need to, could have stood on his first time, ran it again, broke the record. It was a great moment. But who's going to blow up the combine with their athletic testing? And he came up with a couple of names here that I thought were interesting and could factor into the Seahawks draft board. One is Shamar Stewart, a guy that I've talked about ad nauseum for the last few weeks after seeing him in Mobile on Tuesday and Wednesday, and how he was the best player on the field and dominated to the point that he decided to check out on Thursday, as a number of players did, because he had checked all the boxes. He had done what he went there to do, and could probably, as much as that's frustrating for us as fans and maybe some teams, it's becoming more common to the point that I don't think teams are ever going to pass on a guy because he left the Senior Bowl a day or two early, or practiced all week and then didn't play in the game, similar to what Michael Penix did last year. He still got drafted, in the top 12. But Stewart he's a polarizing prospect. There are some of you who have come to me with concerns about, hey, he only had a sack and a half last year. Like he's just all traits, right? He's Tyree Wilson all over again. I think he's a lot more than that. 6'5", 281 athletic freak. Dane says he's going to blow up at the combine. He's going to go out and potentially run a sub 4.5 at that size and speed, and show all of the traits that teams are looking for in an edge rusher, in a very, very good and stacked edge rushing class. And in particular, although there are some smaller guys, some guys that lean on more explosion and quickness and burst, there's some big edges in this draft. If you run a 3-4 and you want a 3-4 defensive end, or even a 4-3, and a guy like, a Leo, or even a guy that can play 5 technique and go wide 9, that kind of versatility is a lot of those players in this draft. And Stewart is certainly one of them. That if he's there at 18, I'm pretty sure he's going to be pretty high on the Seahawks board, but I also don't expect him to be there at 18. The other one is South Carolina safety Nick Imanowori, 6'3", almost 230. It'll be interesting to see what he weighs in Indianapolis, but he's a guy that, Dane says he likes him closer to the line of scrimmage, but he's got a track background. He's going to show some of that athletic ability that makes you think he could be more than that. Really interesting prospect there as well. And then Jihad Campbell's the other one, the inside linebacker / maybe edge player from Alabama. I posted today on Twitter, literally the exact same height and weight as Micah Parsons. And if you remember his background, he was a guy that played off-ball linebacker. And originally that's where Dallas tried him. And then they decided, hey, Dan Quinn decided, let's play him on the edge. And now he's arguably, not arguably. I was going to say he's arguably the best edge defender, pass rusher in the league, but Myles Garrett exists and is a thing. So let's say he's top 3. And a guy that's about to make a lot of money probably in the next few months. So that's another guy that bears watching. And then he also talked about the other end of the spectrum. And that is guys that may be falling down draft boards for off the field reasons. And we start to get clarity on this stuff around the combine, because this is when teams can really dive in and have extended interview. They get those 18-minute interviews. I think they get 75 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And teams will have a chance for themselves. They're going to be investigating. They have their staffs looking into the backgrounds of these players, like private detectives, basically. Really diving in, doing background checks on these guys. But 2 names that I think otherwise, just from a football perspective, would be very appealing to the Seahawks, but that may have major red flags, are James Pierce out of Tennessee, the edge defender, who going into the season last year was a guy that was being mocked in the top 10. And in some mock drafts, I remember preseason was number 1 overall, as analysts were starting to understand that maybe the quarterback class wasn't high enough or good enough this year that one of those guys was going to project at number 1. And then he's still even now being routinely mocked, although it's all over the place, anywhere between 15, I'd say, in the second round. And then Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall, who led the nation in sacks with 17 last year, blew up the combine. Another guy that just did his 2 days and left. Had the viral video moment where he blew Josh Connerly onto his butt in the one-on-ones. Really, really explosive pass rusher who, again, based on just football skills and traits, even with some length concerns, probably isn't going to be there for the Seahawks at 18. It doesn't take a lot of effort online. I didn't know anything about this until 2 days ago, and then some people started to talk about it online, and some of them pretty connected analysts that he has a really disturbing history with some incidents that I'm not even going to mention out loud here, but you can look up yourself in both high school and college. That essentially some are claiming, reportedly, that it's the reason that he had to leave Virginia and go to Marshall to finish his career, because he repeated the behavior that he had in high school when he was told at Virginia there would be a zero tolerance policy. We'll take you on, we love you, but one more mistake and you're gone. And he reportedly had another issue. And so we're going to hear more of those things about more players as we get close to the draft. And again, when it comes to me, building out my big board, which is something I get to really dive into now full time and finish up here over the next few weeks, I'm not going to have them on my Seahawks board because of their behavior in their analysis and in the way that they evaluate players and acquire players since the Malik McDowell situation. They have steered clear of anyone who isn't all about ball, who isn't smart, tough, and dependable. And being dependable means that they don't have to worry about you going and doing something stupid or hurting other people and offending other people when you're away from the team. That, I think Jalen Carter, a supreme talent that fit. I mean, he was the perfect intersection of need and ability, and they passed on him, as 8 other teams did before the Eagles took him at number 9. That if they're not going to take Jalen Carter because they just had an inkling of just something that made him uneasy with the whole traffic accident thing, and then they interviewed him, brought him in for a 30 visit and all of that. They did their due diligence, and if they weren't going to draft Jalen Carter, they're not going to touch one of these guys if these reports have any validity. So I just wanted to touch on those things. I'll get into that stuff a little bit more because it's really, really fascinating. It's free. Apple Podcasts is where I found it. The Athletic Football Podcast. Go check it out. It's unbelievable stuff. Some of the, Robert and Dane are 2 of the best in the business, and really in-depth and fascinating, high-level stuff. So let's get into this. So let me just give you some background on this. I have been not on board with AI since it came around. Some of my bias may be that, as someone with a journalistic background and a broadcasting background, very old school when it comes to that. Like, we could have a long discussion about the state of journalism today and, compared and contrasted to what I learned at the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications about what journalism should be, and what Glenn Johnson, the legendary professor, mayor of Pullman, he's the voice you hear when they get, in the stadium there. He's done their PA stuff for decades. Just a wise, very, very smart man. What I learned journalism isn't what it is anymore. And as I see AI literally taking jobs from people, and I can spot right away a headline and, a lead to a story, I can tell you if it's written by AI. And so I was resistant to it at the beginning. And then a couple of months ago, I thought, what the heck? I saw enough chatter about it. I downloaded Chat GPT and played around with it. And it did some cool stuff. I was entertained by it. I thought it was interesting. And then I started to play around with some ideas as far as in the background in regards to the show with some of the AI creation stuff. There's a thumbnail I used a few weeks ago that I think is kind of hokey, but AI created it, and I thought I'd give it a try, see how it did. And then some other things. That AI is what drives some of the short video clips that you'll see. There's tons of services out there where after I upload a video, I send them the link, and then they process it and they cut it up into clips and add graphics. It's pretty great stuff. It's not 100%. Sometimes they'll throw a basketball icon up there when I'm talking about football, clearly. But that stuff, it's, let's file that under, it's going to get better as it becomes refined. And the thing that I've come to learn about AI, which makes a ton of sense, the more it learns, the smarter it gets, and it doesn't repeat mistakes, and it self-corrects and improves as we go along, at least until they take over the world. But when it comes to yesterday I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try this. And I asked Grok, and I was resistant to that just because as much as Twitter is an essential part of being a sports analyst, content creator, journalist, fan, because that's where the information is first. And that's where the most information is. I will never get rid of Twitter as long as it is the primary place to get news and analysis first from the best people out there. But just there are a lot of things kind of about Twitter that I don't like. And so I was like, I'm not going to try this Grok thing. But I did. And I asked it. And I believe the way that I posed the question, I tried to make it, I've learned this, right? We get smarter, and AI is only as good as the information you put into it. So I asked it, I would like you to predict who the Seattle Seahawks are going to draft this year in the NFL draft with their 8 selections based on roster needs and rankings of available prospects, something along those lines. And what came back to me, I thought, was surprisingly good. So I tried it on Chat GPT. Same result. Now, before I show you these, it's not perfect, obviously, and I'll point those things out. But I have seen human-created mock drafts that are way worse than these. And again, they can only be as good just as we can with the information we're given. These mock draft simulators are not perfect. There's so many of them, and they've come a long way, and they're fun to play with, and they're great. But they're only as good as their rankings. And even still, even after the Senior Bowl and everything else leading up to the Combine, Pro Football Network, their rankings are still way off on some prospects. There's guys ranked in the 200s that are going to go in the first round. Like Darius Alexander is available in the 5th round. That's never going to happen. He might be a first-round pick. And there's other examples of that, which we'll touch on. And there's a couple of those in here. Mock Draft Database has some guys way, way, way too low. PFF has some guys too high because they only go off of their grades, which is one of the things I like about PFF, but also can be their undoing at times. They're so married to those grades, whereas some of the other simulators go a little bit more off of kind of what's out there in the universe and the consensus. So let's do this. I'm going to show you the Grok draft first, give you my thoughts on it, and then the Chat GPT, and then I want you all in the comments to tell me which one you like best. Okay? And then there's a bunch of you in here already, and then I'll take some questions and comments, draft questions, as we head into the Combine coming up next week. All right, let's start with Grok. Here we go. So, first round, right off the bat, Tyler Booker, guard, Alabama. As much as I have been saying for months that the Seahawks aren't going to be in a position at the end of April where they have to take an offensive lineman, in particular an interior guy, in the first round. If the right guy is there, it still absolutely makes sense. As much as I can tell you that this class is deep and they can address and get a dynamic blue chip guy at 18 at another position, a premium position, defensive tackle, one of those edge guys, one of those, if one of those tight ends, Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland, falls to 18, they'd be silly not to take one of them. Those guys are game changers, right? Maybe a wide receiver. Booker, I think, is a little different story. Now, he's one of the guys I'm going to be watching the closest at the Combine because I want to see how he moves in space in these drills, especially like the wave drill, right? That's the one where they start off on the ground, they have to get up, and then they have to move and react to the movement of the coach. Can he play and thrive in an outside zone scheme? Because not only is he the right size and weight, and he has the right mentality, and he's a mauler, and he's really good in pass protection also, but the things you hear about this guy, I've heard him being referred to as a Will Anderson type as far as an alpha and a leader. So right off the bat, I'm like, okay, Grok, You got the Seahawks taking Tyler Booker in particular, and I've been saying this, the Seahawks are going to sign someone significant in free agency this year, someone you're going to like. I hope it's a center. I'll talk more about that next week. I'm going to do a whole episode on a particular player that I want them to take and think is a realistic target. Now, second round, Deion Walker. 6'5", 345. An incredible athlete for that size. He's a guy that could really, really blow people away at the combine. But he's a little high cut. He doesn't have the base that I'd like for that size. He plays too high. But he's such a freak athlete. I've classified him as, first of all, this is the perfect range for him. I think he's a second rounder all day long. If the Seahawks take him, then I'm confident that they have a plan for him and they see something they like. Not just because of his physical traits, but because it's a very, very deep defensive tackle class. Daniel Jeremiah said he has it's either 24 or 27 starting grades on defensive tackles in this class, and that's a very high number. And so if they choose him over some of these other guys, I'm going to treat it the way that I did the Tyrese Knight pick last year, where they took him in the 4th round. That was higher than most people said he should be ranked. And my first instinct was, okay, Mike McDonald must know what he's talking about. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And it looks like Tyrese Knight's going to be a pretty damn good player. So I would think the same way about Walker. Now, here's the first misstep. There is no way on God's green earth that Jihad Campbell is going to be available in the 3rd round. In fact, I don't even think he's going to be available at 18. And as much as he has been mocked in some of these early mocks from some big-time draft analysts, there were 2 big mock drafts that came out a couple of weeks ago, and they both had him taking Campbell. One was Matt Miller's. I think the other one might have been Lance Zierlein's. And I thought, well, that's silly because I fully expect them to re-sign Ernest Jones. There's not a spot for him. The more that I look into Campbell, the more I think he's a little bit of a chess piece and might not strictly be an off-ball linebacker. In fact, there are many who think he's actually best rushing the passer and playing edge and could be kind of not a poor man's Micah Parsons, because this guy's an elite athlete. He's going to show that in Indy, but no way he's going to be there in the 3rd round. So that's the first red X on this draft, right? 4th round, Luke Kandra, guard, Cincinnati, a guy that I haven't studied yet, a guy who's just come into my view in the last 4 or 5 days, but my goodness, how quickly he has. And it's like I'd never heard of the kid, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing him everywhere. And he kind of fits into that very, very similar mold to me of what I saw from Clay Webb at the Senior Bowl, of what I saw from Jackson Slater. Like Mauler, physical, intensity, motor, but he can move too. And I think that's kind of the right range for him. That would be, I mean, you're talking about if the Seahawks go out and sign a really good center in free agency, which I think they should try to do, especially given that Clint Kubiak puts more on the center's plate. Center calls the protections, not the quarterback. He has mentioned that he needs that his scheme kind of thrives around an quote-unquote elite center. It's what he told KJR. They do that. You had Tyler Booker and Luke Kandra to compete with Christian Haynes. You're stacking yourself now. You're protecting yourself. I like that. How can you not? Now, 5th round, Jackson Dart, no way he's there. No way he's there. We've had conversations about it, and we'll continue to. We'll get into the quarterbacks a little deeper as we get into the combine. You know, Dart's a guy that I think is ultimately, at the end of the day, is going to end up in the back half of the 1st round. But at worst, he's a 2nd round pick. So he's not there. That's a miss. But they're going off some database, some mock simulator or big board that they pulled from that had Dart that low. I can tell you right now, PFN does, and so does PFF. But that doesn't match what scouts and GMs are saying. 6th round, there's 2 picks. Fadil Diggs, edge, Syracuse, long, athletic, really cut up. Great value in the 6th round. I think the Seahawks will address edge, and they should in this draft, right? We don't know if Shannon Nwosu can get through a season healthy. We don't know if he's going to be on the roster. I think he will be. I think they'll adjust his contract. I think they want him around and he will be here, right? But Boye Mafe is going to be eligible for a contract extension, and as good as he is, he hasn't really gotten to that level that I want to see and that I think most of us want him to be. Derek Hall might have a higher ceiling than Boye Mafe. 8.5 sacks in his second year. But again, I think he fits into that category of really, really good player. Don't know if he's ever going to be a blue chip. So taking another edge here makes sense. Kyron Lacy, though, as much as I think wide receiver is a huge need, it will be addressed, maybe even early. We could see wide receiver addressed in the first 2 days in this draft. Get ready for it. Lacy's a guy who's dealing with a really significant legal issue right now that won't be resolved by the draft. I don't think he's going to be on the Seahawks board. But that's something that I can understand why AI wouldn't catch that. And then Upton Stout in the 7th. He's a small school kid, corner, a little bit on the smaller side, probably going to play nickel. They had him listed actually as a safety. But from what I saw in Mobile, he's a corner, probably an inside guy, but he can play some outside. Really quick, sticky in coverage. He's probably not there in the 7th round, but it wouldn't shock me if he is. So overall, like I said, like I've seen human mocks way worse than this. Now, let's compare it to what Chat GPT had to say. Right off the bat. Again, at least AI acknowledges that the biggest need the Seahawks have is offensive line, right? Wyatt Millum, offensive lineman in West Virginia, played tackle for the Mountaineers. Some teams may think he can stick there. He played both in Mobile. I thought he looked uncomfortable and got beat a number of times on day one in Mobile. And by Thursday, by the last practice day, he was playing exclusively at guard, and that's where I like him the best. He's a guy that's just an old school blue collar worker, likes to pancake guys, drive you into the ground. He's a finisher. He can move really well, heavy hands. I would not blink an eye if the Seahawks took Wyatt Millum at 18. And he's one of those guys, too, that in a pinch could play tackle. Probably not left tackle, but right tackle. If Abe Lucas were to go down again, I like that versatility. In the second round, Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford. I told you, wide receivers in need, right? Especially when Tyler Lockett's not on this roster anymore. Complimentary guy, 6'3", 215, kind of that body style and a better route runner than DK Metcalf, but bigger than JSN. I think he'd be a really complimentary receiver. I said it earlier, get ready. Wide receiver could happen on day 2. I think that's a real possibility. In the third round, Omar Norman Lott, a guy that I didn't get to see as much of in Mobile as I wanted to. He was, I can't recall now if he was hurt or if he was sick a little bit, kind of under the weather. So he was kind of in and out. Interesting prospect coming into the draft process because he didn't play a lot of snaps. They rotated heavily in Tennessee, keep their guys fresh. But one of the most explosive interior penetrators in this defensive tackle class, which is intriguing. And again, take him in the third round. I trust that they have a plan, but probably not the type of interior defensive tackle. I think the Seahawks are more likely to take a tackle that allows Byron Murphy to move off of having to play nose so much and can concentrate on being a 3 technique and maybe even move outside and play a little edge. And so I don't know that he's the perfect fit, but a really dynamic talent and a guy that can get after the passer. Fourth round, Jeffrey Bossa, linebacker, Oregon, a guy that played Mike at Oregon, but I think has more of the body style of a weak side linebacker. But, that's great that he's got that green dot experience. He's been a leader. He was a leader in the huddle. You could see it on the field at the Senior Bowl. He's rocked up. Looks like he was made in a lab. I think that'd be a great pick, especially if Ernest Jones comes back. You need a third guy. Right now, it's Drake Thomas. You feel good about that? I think Jeffrey Bossa would be an outstanding third linebacker to add to that group. Fifth round, Josiah Stewart, a Michigan guy, did not play for Mike McDonald, was not there when McDonald was. He's an undersized edge guy. There's a couple of these guys in the class. Really productive, a lot of burst, a lot of bend. I didn't see him make plays in Mobile the way I wanted to, but the game tape's there. And in the fifth round, that's great value. Sixth round, Luke Lachey, Iowa tight ends are usually a pretty safe bet. He had a very, very significant ankle injury his junior year, but he was able to come back last year and play 12 games. But there's some who say that there's still some concern there, potentially some long-term effects, and that there might be another, it's not just the ankle, but it's another issue with his leg as well. So the medical part of the combine is really going to be important for him. But I think tight end's a big need. Remains to be seen if they're going to keep Noah Fant. Pharaoh Brown's probably not going to be back. It was a one-year deal. It didn't go great. And Brady Russell's intriguing because he can play some fullback too, which is a need now in the Kubiak system, but he wasn't able to stay healthy last year. But he's cheap. He's a guy they just have to tender. He'll be back. He'll have a shot to make the roster. But taking a tight end out of a tight end class that's been called the best since 2010 by one prominent analyst, I just don't know about the injury history. But, all day long, again, in the 6th round, heck yeah. And then you see where this one kind of goes off the rails. Jahad Campbell, we talked about him being in the Grok draft in the 3rd round. Yeah, he's not going to be there in the 6th. That's a miss. And then Braden Swinson is a guy that is getting a lot of attention the last couple of weeks. Really intriguing edge. I can see him being a guy from what I've seen so far on tape that will be on the Seahawks board relatively high. From everything I'm hearing, it's very doubtful he'll be there in the 7th round. He may make it through to day 3 just because of the depth of this class. But unless there's something I don't know, unless there's something off the field or some other red flags, I don't think 7th round is realistic for him. Those are the two. What I want you to do is comment down below which one you like better. And don't, I've already pointed out the misses and the mistakes on their part of rating guys way, way, way too low. So just take the ones that are realistic, kind of give me your idea of who you think came up with the better one. I just thought that was kind of fun. This coming Monday, speaking of mock drafts, which I will do every, I know it's become a thing. I wasn't the first to think of it. Mock draft Mondays. But I'll do a couple of things this Monday. I'll do a pre-combine mock draft of my own. And then I'm also going to, I call it mocking the mocks, but there's a couple of big ones that have come out in the last couple of days that I'll give my thoughts on and share that as well. Hi, guys. Let's get into the comments and see what we got here. First of all, right off of the bat, Tony Bag of Donuts, a member, gifted some memberships. So thank you for doing that. Really, really appreciate it. You guys can step up and claim those if you would like. And on that note, since I'll be doing this exclusively and full time for the next few months, I will be creating, in addition to the live shows Monday through Friday, and any other time if any news breaks on a Saturday or Sunday, but I'll also be doing some shorter form content around it. I will make some of that membership exclusive, and I'll try to at least once a week do a members only live stream, and we can just chat about whatever seems to be, the current topic at hand. Yeah, King Lock says Jihad at 3 is crazy. Sean S just says Jackson Slater. I mean, they didn't throw him in there. Neither of them took him. But the kid from Bellevue, the kid from Newport High School, who I had on the show. If you haven't checked that out yet, go back about 2 weeks. Great interview, great kid. Seahawks interviewed him twice at the Senior Bowl. He said they were the only team to do so. Very, very cool. Let's see. What do we got here? Hey, McVirus says, finally I can catch a live. Let's talk about that for a second. Most of these will most likely be around this time. My partner works nights and she needs sleep during the day. And so I'm going to use the daytime, following when she has to work to be productive, get to the gym, run some errands, look at tape. So most of these will be done at night. I think it's also the best time to do it, frankly, because, some of the other creators out there who do such a great job talking about the Seahawks are more kind of early in the day. And so this will give y'all an opportunity to fit it into your schedule a little bit later, sort of during prime TV time. Also, generally speaking, internet is a little bit more burly and formidable at night, and so I clocked some great numbers right before I went on. I knew I would have no issues with the live stream tonight. So probably be around this time, Pacific. I'm now in the central times or mountain time zone. Sorry. And so, probably pretty typically around, if we're talking Pacific time, like between 8 and 9 o'clock. Hope that works for y'all. Yo, Mr. Viens from Motive. How you doing, man? Thanks for being here. Finally a live one. I had a little bit of a break, War Chief. I was on the road for a few days and getting set and everything. Yeah, I think the foundation of this channel will be the live. I love the engagement, really do. Love getting your comments and questions, and then being able to frees me up to do some shorter form stuff, that can be a little more targeted and focused. Like I've got plans mapped out. Like we'll just talk about one prospect. This guy fits, right? Or maybe why this guy doesn't, even though everyone's talking about him. More specific aspects of some things. War Chief says, really for a tight end or defensive tackle or edge rusher at 18, but wouldn't be mad if Gray was taken in that spot either. Look, there's a couple of prospects that have kind of risen to the top based on, early evaluations and some of the consensus out there that just would absolutely perfectly fit what the Seahawks need and what they do. When you talk about the offensive linemen, that's a long list. There's a bunch of guys. If they wanted to go offensive line at 18, there's a ton of guys that would be really good fits. I could say the same thing about the second round, third round, fourth round. There's some guys that really, really fit in to those ranges. But the two that stand out above the most for me are Tyler Booker and Gray Zabel. And while, the heat was really hot in Mobile, like he was so good down there that all of a sudden there were those who thought he's not going to be there at 18. And now he's I see him on most big boards in the top 50, but in the 40 to 50 range. And I see him being there more and more in mock drafts and on big boards at the Seahawks' second pick. He could be a guy that if they feel like 18 is too rich, they take another player. And then if he's sitting there at 42 or 43, the Seahawks may think, okay, we need Gray Zabel, and move up from there. They've got that extra 6. There's a lot of appeal in next year's draft. It's considered to be better. And so you could probably get a lot of leverage if you're looking at a move up by adding maybe a day 3 pick next year. Might have some value. Yeah, I could see that. He really fits. There's a bunch of offensive linemen that I like in this draft that I think would fit perfectly. Tony Bag of Donuts. Go Hawks. Yep. Kyron Lacy will not be drafted by anyone, nor will he ever play in an NFL game ever. Yeah, so he's being charged with, I think it's vehicular manslaughter. Is that right? He was involved in a traffic accident. He was passing a bunch of cars, driving recklessly. Where have you heard this before? Right? And someone died. And, yeah, again, if they didn't take Jalen Carter because they were concerned about his, and he was just kind of adjacent to that situation, they're not taking a receiver in the 6th round, not when there's other guys that are clean. Okay, let's talk about this, right? A little bonus content. What's up with Ernest Jones? I'm shocked he hasn't been re-signed yet, and definitely not cancerous. Okay. I don't think he's going. I think this is Leonard Williams part 2. I really do. The Seahawks tried to get him signed before the end of the year. They decided to step away. And then Ernest Jones came out after the Rams game and flat out said in the locker room on camera, it's going to get done. This is where I want to be. Just has to work its course. But I think while there is a chance it gets done before March 12th, because, and John Schneider talked about this last night, and if you didn't see that coach's show, I reacted in real time to it, so check that out. he talks about how they find out these things at the combine. Like legal tampering doesn't start on March 12th. It starts in Indianapolis this week. He flat out said, we talk to agents, we talk to other teams, we find out what guys' markets are. And if they find out that no team out there is going to be willing to pay Ernest Jones more than $12 million a year, then they offer him 3 for 48 or 3 for 50 just to put it over the top and maybe get it done. But worst case scenario, I think, is he tests the market the day free agency starts, that first Monday, the 12th. He doesn't find anything better than what the Seahawks are offering. This is where he wants to be and get it done then, just like with Leonard Williams. Now, hopefully, it doesn't cost him another player like it did last year, presumably, or at least from what Schneider said, in that they wanted to bring Jordan Brooks back as well. I think it gets done. Now, the cancerous thing today was ridiculous. Ernest Jones comes out, and I see it on Twitter, like as soon as it happened. It was a 3-part tweet about how I've only ever treated people well. You know, anyone who says I'm a locker room cancer doesn't know me. And my first reaction was, what? What is he talking about? Did a little Twitter search, couldn't find anything. So I put it out there, like, who's calling him a cancer? And then his agent actually replied to me and said, and showed me a tweet from someone, just some guy on Twitter, a nobody, who was speculating, spitballing. He must be a locker room cancer if all he's getting traded for is a 5th and 6th round pick swap and a 4th. We've never heard anything about Ernest Jones other than he's a great locker room guy and a leader and a guy who lifts his teammates up. So I reached out to Jake Ellenbogen, who you've seen on the show, Rams full-time content creator. He's managed to work some really great connections in that organization. He talks to players and coaches all the time. And he said none of that was ever said about Ernest Jones in LA. So it's a shame that even gains traction. I thought it was really interesting of his agent to even send me that tweet and reply to me on that. I think that I understand what he's trying to do, but I think it actually kind of fans the flames a little bit. It gets done. I'm absolutely sure it gets done. Now, if there's a 1% chance that it doesn't, and someone swoops in and overpays him, then I think we start talking really, really hard about Jihad Campbell in the first or Carson Schwessinger in the second, or maybe a guy like Demetrius Knight as South Carolina in the second, who's a real rocked up Mike linebacker, as major potential targets of the Seahawks on their draft board. Bill Anderson, be surprised if Dart's there in the 5th. I'll be surprised if Dart's there in the 3rd. I think he's gone on day 2 at the latest. I still think he gets into the back half of the first round. Jeff Shelkey says 2 best players at the end of the draft. LOL. Absolutely. Sean Lee says, howdy, go Hawks. Go Hawks right back at you. MWM says if Lachey can get healthy and stay healthy, he's a great pick in the 6th round. He flat out, from what I've watched so far, there's something about Iowa tight ends that he can block and he's a capable pass catcher. So, yeah, if he's 100% healthy, passes with flying colors in Indianapolis, he's in the conversation. Absolutely. MWM says, I like Slater as well, but I think he goes undrafted and Hawks can get him after the draft. Don't know if you watched the interview, but he said he's being told, and his agent has heard from teams, that he went into the Senior Bowl in the 6th round, and now he's potentially a day 2 guy. Late day 2, early day 3. He's absolutely getting drafted. Who are my draft crushes? It's way too early to unveil those because they haven't quite been defined yet. I mean, so far, Zabel, ton of the offensive linemen, Clay Webb, Zabel, Slater, Marcus Bowe, inside, not as a tackle. I think as a center or guard's really intriguing. Some of the receivers, Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Big fan of Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. Don't really have a quarterback draft crush yet. Have a lot more work to do on those guys. I did preliminary work, but I go deeper on the quarterbacks. A ton of the running backs I like, but it's not really a need. I think they take a guy on day 3 at some point. You just keep taking those guys and stacking them up, right? Because of the value of the position. Shamar Stewart's one. Some of the defensive tackles, really like what I see from. I'll give you one right now, and then I'll cut it off, because closer to the draft, I'll do a full on my guys list, right, of my draft crushes. But Tim Smith is a guy that's not getting talked about. Defensive tackle, Alabama, 6'5", 310. You'd like him to be 320, 325, but he plays like he is. Just really, really stout at the point of attack, gets his arms extended, uses great leverage, has some juice. Kind of reminds me, he's obviously a lot longer, but his style of play is similar to Byron Murphy. Like, he can anchor and really take on a block and hold a guy up. I think Tim Smith is getting slept on and is a guy that kind of reminds me of Jaron Reed a little bit. And then he slipped to the second round because he was known more as a run defender than a guy that gets after the passer, but I think he's got that upside. I'm taking him in the second round all day long and filling that need if I can. War Chief, aloha, Dan. My question is, at what round should we expect an interior offensive lineman to be drafted before we get nervous? Not talking about free agency, just the draft. Ask me again a week before the draft, right? Let's see what they do in free agency. But just not to brush off your question, I think the latest they address interior offensive line is the third round. I think they address it before the end of day 2, similar to what they did last year with Christian Haynes. And while if they don't, I still wouldn't panic, because I do think they'll address interior offensive line and free agency in a way that we're going to feel good about. And I think Christian Haynes has a very, very good chance to fit into this new scheme and be a starter next year. Don't give up on him. So if they haven't taken a guy yet by the end of the third round, I know it sucks because we have to go to bed and we have to wait. Similar to 2 years ago, when defensive tackle was a massive need and they didn't address it until day 3, and we were all like, what the hell are they doing? And then they took Cam Young and Mike Morris back to back. Those guys haven't panned out yet. Young hasn't been healthy. Morris hasn't really established himself, but you get my point, right? Those guys still could develop. I honestly think worst case realistic scenario is third round. And if they don't take one in the first or second, again, don't panic. This class is good enough. Dominic Scott, why hasn't anyone really discussed trading back? Compromise with a team like the Bills, they move up 10 spots, steal another second round pick from them. Absolutely. And my answer to that is simply, for me anyway, it's too early. For right now, as I'm trying to work through as many prospects as I can, and I obviously had a delay the last couple of weeks with moving and everything else, and now that I get to really dig in full time and we get the combine to add more data to the evaluation, that I'm just focusing on the 8 picks they have right now. But in this draft in particular, when you start to hear things about this class, like it lacks blue chip players, but it's very deep overall. Daniel Jeremiah said he calls this a starter's draft. He ranks players as, elite blue chip, and then solid starter, and then solid backup. And interestingly enough, we heard John Schneider on his show yesterday kind of say the same thing. And DJ says this is a starter's draft. There are starting players at every position littered all throughout all 7 rounds. You can get good starting players in this draft. We've also heard from one analyst, and I apologize, I can't remember who said it, that from 20 to 60, same level of talent. And so that absolutely lends itself to trading back, because every team has different tastes and different evaluation processes. And if there's a guy at 18 that the Seahawks aren't interested in, but another team really, really wants, Bills could be a great example. What if Tet McMillan doesn't test as well at his big frame and is still there at 18, and the Bills are like, oh man, we need that. That's the guy. That's the receiver we need for Josh Allen to thrive. Or maybe it's Mecca Ibuka or another guy like that, right? Luther Burden could be another guy at 18 that really fits in well, especially because they took Keon Coleman last year. So they, maybe they don't want a second big guy. So Burden could be a guy that makes a lot of sense there, just for example. Or Ashton Genty gets to 18, a team wants to come up and get him, like the Chiefs, right? Absolutely makes sense. And there's a couple of teams at the end of the first round that what they have in trade capital matches up with the trade value charts to move up to 18. I just haven't gotten there yet. So we used to talk about it all the time because it was what John did every single year. The last 3 years, he has been more prone to stick and take the best player on the board. But this year, I think as we get closer to the draft, I will, and you'll see it in my mock drafts here coming up after the combine, we'll start doing some trade down stuff because that's when things start to get really, really exciting. For example, the defensive line group is so deep, you can move back 10 spots in the first round and still get just as impactful a player 10 spots later and pick up an extra day 2 and an extra day 3 pick. In this draft, hell yeah, doing that. Gives you more bites at the apple and gives you an opportunity to have that luxury pick to take a flyer on a quarterback. I think that's a really important point. Dominic, thanks for bringing that up. All right. I love questions like this. If these 3 players are available at 18, who's the best prospect? Who's the best fit? Jalen Walker, Jihad Campbell, Kenneth Grant. Whoa. It's a great list. So Walker and Campbell, I kind of put in the same bucket. Campbell's a little bigger, a little longer, but they're very similar in what they offer. They have a background as an off-ball linebacker, but they might be more productive as an edge. And that kind of feels like exactly the type of player that Mike Macdonald's going to drool over. A chess piece. As much as he likes his players to be completely versatile, right? And almost positionless. Be able to move guys around and drop guys into coverage, bring guys forward. He kind of did that with Malik Harrison in Baltimore, right? He wasn't really a true stud off-ball linebacker. He wasn't really a true edge, but he moved around, did both. I, at this point, cannot tell you which guy I think fits better between Walker and Campbell. I would lean Campbell just because he's bigger. But Grant, completely different than those guys. And Jeremiah talked about this again on his conference call this week, that he's not a complete player yet. He's raw. But my goodness, the traits are there. He's been on Bruce Feldman's freak list the last couple of years. He's huge. He's powerful. He's quick. He's explosive. You'll see him on one play just stand up to a double team and occupy it so the play gets blown up. And on another play, you'll see him throw an offensive lineman out of the way. And on another one, you'll see him just flat out beat a guy with quickness and get to the quarterback. Grant at 18 would make a ton of sense. I don't know if I answered the question here because I didn't just pick one. But I think all 3 of those guys, you're on the right track, are going to be very, very high on the Seahawks board, I think, provided everything checks out, interviews, everything else. And I think Grant is a guy that had some intersection with Mike Macdonald. Let me look that up. Yeah. Okay. Let's just see. Was Grant there in 2021? Maybe not. Nope. Committed. Didn't enroll until 2022. So Mike Macdonald did not coach Kenneth Grant. But he's still got the connections there. Also, Jay Harbaugh has the connections there. So they're going to get all that intel, right? And they're gonna know anything that they need to know about Kenneth Grant. War Chief says his draft crushes are Gray, Wyatt Millum, Bossa, and Scatabo. Scatabo, I think, is one of those guys that is going to, I think he's going to get a lot of attention at the combine. I hope he runs. That's what everybody wants to see. What's he going to clock? Is he a 4.6 guy? It might not matter because he's just so powerful and so elusive, even without that breakaway speed. But I hope he runs and just shows that competitive spirit, right? Didn't go to the Senior Bowl, didn't play any of the All-Star games. I'd like to see him make up for that by running at the Senior Bowl. Now, he's a guy that, it's way, way, way too early to pigeonhole him as this. But with his size and his running style, could he be a complementary back to Charbonnet and Walker and kind of play fullback? He's one of the guys. I'm going to do a list right before the combine of guys that I'm going to be watching, probably a top 10 guys that I want to see the most. He's going to be on that list for sure. McVirus, who are the wide receivers that we should study if the Hawks are thinking of getting one in the second? Okay, second round. I think Jaden Higgins is a big one, Iowa State. He's 6'4". I like the length, but if you watch him on tape and you see his release package off the line, how he's able to shake guys and get separation, you would think he's 6 foot. I think he's really kind of a little bit of a unicorn there. Really, really soft hands as well. And then Jalen Royals is the other guy that I absolutely love all day long out of Utah State. Thickly built in his lower half. Kind of reminds me of a 1 inch taller Golden Tate. Looks like a running back when he runs the football. Is a guy that you can line up in the backfield and do some cool things with. But when you look at his body type, you think, well, he might not be that quick or that explosive of an athlete. But some scouts are expecting him to break 4.4 in the 40 at the combine. So he's another guy. I'll give you those two kind of right off the top of my head in the second round that I think would really, really be good fits for the Hawks. I'm not sure where Tez Johnson fits in this draft because he's so small, but he's so explosive. Nobody can cover him. I could see him being sort of that Rashid Shaheed kind of chess piece that Kubiak used last year until he hurt his knee. So he might be another one. Second round might be a little rich for him just because of his size. Willie Deloney says Shamar Stewart is Draymond Jones. I don't think so. Jones' problem is he's a tweener. He was built like a tackle and played tackle in Denver, but he's not stout enough. And then they tried to make him outside linebacker out of him, but he's not explosive enough. I think Stewart's a guy that can absolutely hold the edge in the run game, and the sky's the limit for him and his ceiling as a pass rusher. It's going to come. It's going to come. I think he's going to be a much more productive NFL player than Draymond Jones. Hey, Zach agrees. Boom. Dominic says, thank you for your insight on trading back. The other question I have is, do you see the quarterbacks for the later rounds in this class as being developmental to a starter or rather more of a backup? I think the thing about this class, some people have just called it bad and they refuse to accept that there might be starters in this class. I think that's a bad scouting process. I think, I talked a little bit about this in the show yesterday. If you don't like a prospect, watch him a little bit more and specifically look for things you like about him and vice versa. If you're in love with the guy, try to find reasons to poke holes in him. I think that's the best process and the best way to really honestly evaluate a guy. And that's no truer than when it comes to quarterbacks. And this class is full of guys that I think there's talent, there's upside, but the boom or bust rate is really high. Some people talk about this class as if none of them can make it. It's not like that at all, in my opinion. Some of them can. They have the traits, they have the upside, but it's boom or bust, and that all comes down to fit, where you end up, how you're developed. And so I think the perfect example, maybe the guy that exemplifies this the most, is Tyler Shuck. I know he's an older prospect. He's 25. He's going to be 26 his rookie year. He might have the best arm in the class. Yeah, maybe better than Cam Ward. He was the most consistently good, impressive performer in Mobile the whole week. He has wow throws all over his tape. He's been in 3 different systems. People speak highly of him in every single stop. He's 6'5", but he's athletic and he can move. I could see him being a very, very good starter. Somebody yesterday said his ceiling is Ryan Tannehill. Okay. If you don't think Ryan Tannehill is a very good comp, go look at his prime years. Go look at his best 3-4 years. Ryan Tannehill, you can do a lot worse. For a day 3 guy, I think he's a good example of this class. Will Howard's another one. I think he could be a high-level starter that you can win with in the NFL. I think he could be a guy that never sees the field if he goes to the wrong spot. There's others. Kyle McCord, I think, fits into that as well. It just all depends on where they go. That applies to the top 2 guys, too. None of them are sure things, but there's 6 or 7 guys in this class that could be good starters in the NFL if they go to the right environment and they're handled properly, developed properly, surrounded with a good supporting cast. Zach says, I want to trade back for more third-round picks unless someone drastically drops to us at 18. Absolutely. You hear a lot of people say, hey, we should trade back and just pick up more seconds. That's very difficult to do unless it's a massive trade back. When you look at the trade value charts, go look at the Jimmy Johnson chart, which a lot of teams still use, or they've built their own chart based off of that, or the Rich Hill chart, which takes the Jimmy Johnson chart, but adapts it and uses actual data from trades made over the last 10 years. That's the one I tend to use. Look at both of those and then pick a team. The Kansas City Chiefs at 31, wanting to move all the way up to 18, and see what the value is. You're not getting a second unless you throw something else in, right? So the third is more realistic and kind of fits into that. And I think the third might be the meat of this draft. So yeah, I'm with you. I'd love to get another third round pick. Savion Williams. Okay, there's one off the top of my head I didn't mention. TCU, 6'5", long. He gets knocked sometimes because he looks physically almost exactly like, now I'm blanking on the name, the kid from TCU 2 years ago that went in the first round of the Chargers and can't catch. He's not like that. And at 6'5", you wouldn't think he's this guy, but he'll take the ball out of the backfield on fly sweeps, little, bubble screens and slants and go the distance. Really explosive athlete. Thanks for bringing him up. He's a guy that, even though he's a bigger receiver, much, much different skill set and set of traits than DK Metcalf. I think he'd be an outstanding complement that would allow JSN and DK to really just do what they do while he's going to work on the outside. Good call. Good poll on that. We have a true speed wide receiver and a true slot wide receiver. What we need now is a possession receiver. I get where you're going with this. Like, we need a guy that can thrive in the middle of the field, right, and run great routes and get separation. But I don't want to limit it to that. You want a guy that can take the top off too, right, and hit home runs. And I think that's what Kubiak likes to do. He likes to pound away at you with the wide zone run scheme, and then he wants to hit you over the top with a big play. We saw that early in the season last year for the Saints before they were racked with injuries, especially when Derek Carr was healthy and Shaheed was healthy and their offensive line was in place and Kamara was cooking. He'd suck you in with Kamara and then he'd hit you over the top with Olave or Shaheed. And don't limit yourself to just a possession receiver. You want Xavier Restrepo? Okay, would love that. But I think he might be a little bit more similar to JSN than I want. DK's limited in what he does, right? He's a physical receiver. He can body guys. He's going to make the tough catches over the middle of the field. Let's get another guy that can play outside and get separation and run the full route tree. And then I think you really free up DK and JSN, make it really tough for teams to decide who to double team, if at all. Rather be flying an X-Wing. Love the new background. Who's your dream free agent signing versus what you think is most likely to happen? Yeah, green screening it now that I'm a little bit more mobile. Wasn't able to bring all the background stuff with me for this setup. And so going to be having a lot of fun with this. Can really play around with this and do some graphics and stuff. So thanks for the shout out. My first green screen experience. Johnston down with the Chargers. I remember that game. Was it a Monday night game where they were trying to come back? They were down by one score late in the game, and Herbert kept throwing it to him like 4 or 5 times in a row. He dropped every one. Quentin Johnston, is that the name? Yeah. Shadow 12, do you think Dart in the second? If he's there at 50, he would be under major consideration, and I would be shocked if the Seahawks don't have him at the top of their board or near the top of their board and give heavy consideration to him at 50. And honestly, that might be a perfect scenario. If I'm drafting the perfect mock draft right now for the Seahawks for what they need today and in the future, I'm getting that guy in free agency to help on the interior offensive line. Center is my preference. I'm taking a defensive lineman or edge, tackle or edge in that first round, probably a tackle, right? I'm hoping to get Kenneth Grant, maybe Derek Harmon, right? One of those guys. And then if Dart's there at 50, hell yeah, take him. And then you come back in the third round, you take another one of those offensive linemen, right? You get like a Clay Webb, or a Miles Frazier if he tests well enough and they think he can fit in the outside zone. One of those guys, or that Luke Kandra, in the third round. To me, that's almost the perfect first 2 days of the draft, because you take a guy in Dart, you don't have to play him right away. I think he fits the system. I think his upside's tremendous. The boom-bust potential's there, like I said earlier. But you let him sit, no pressure to play, and maybe you've got your guy of the future. I like that idea a lot. No, that's not the right music. That's not hardcore enough. Let's go with this. Let's throw this last one in here. Sean Proper got in properly, just under the gun. Speaking of wide receivers, and Lance Zierlein's latest mock had Seattle picking Luther Burden. Yeah, Burden's cool because he is like that Shaheed type player, where he's different than JSN. He's a guy you can get out of the backfield. He's a smaller guy, slot only, sort of. I think he kind of exemplifies that mold of what they wanted D. Eskridge to be, right? So Burden would make sense. Now 18 might be a little rich for me, but you trade back or he slips to the second round. I like that a lot. MWN also sneaking in under the gun. Don't forget this draft has a lot of tight ends that are basically wide receivers who can fill that wide receiver need as well. Absolutely. Fannin, who can also play fullback. I like that. Arroyo, absolutely. Mason Taylor, Jake Brenningstool. There's a bunch of guys that are basically like, Y move tight ends that can get out and be basically receivers. And I'll end on this note. If Colson Loveland somehow falls to 18, I'm sprinting to the podium and taking that dude. He fits that exact mold that you're talking about there. Wait, War Chief said, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of partial to the Fantasy Fairy music. It's a harp. I've got some sound effects and stuff built into this mixer. And then Ricky Ricardo sneaking one in. How would you feel about the first two picks being interior offensive line and best available at those positions? Good, fine. Because you're talking about interior offensive line at 18 is going to be Tyler Booker or Wyatt Millham, right? Yeah, I'd feel great about that. Throw more competition at that spot. And again, some combination of a free agent interior offensive lineman, my preference is center. I'll tell you who my preference is next week. And then one more high-level prospect that can start as a rookie to add to Christian Haynes and LeMaya and Jalen Sundell, possibly. Maybe Oluwatimi if he moves off a center and can play a little bit of both. I think you're setting yourself up for success knowing Charles Cross, another year older and more experience, and Abe Lucas being able to have a full, healthy offseason. I think you're starting to see the pieces with the coaching staff they brought in and all that experience on offense, which I think is better than they've had there in the last couple of years. That's going to do it for me. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Not sure what's coming up this weekend. Probably we'll do something tomorrow and then take Sunday off and then get back into the swing of things on Monday. I will let you know on Twitter what that's going to be. Thank you, as always, for viewing and listening and supporting the channel. Any other way that you might want to support the channel, those links are all down in the description. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this program as well. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.